It's Christmas, so you know what that means. It's time to pull up the classic Bethlehemian fir tree in celebration for the birth of God. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. So what's to do with Christmas trees? Why does the Christian-influenced West cut down trees, put them in their homes, and decorate them for Christmas? Well, if these totally reputable articles that come out every year are anything to go off of, it's simply that Christians appropriated the traditions from pagan practices. That's it. That's why it doesn't make any sense. They just took it from the pagans. It's not Christian, it's just pagan stuff that the Christians took. Or is it? So other people have made videos on this topic before, but if you didn't know, Christmas trees, yeah, they're probably not pagan. In fact, they're most likely a Christian invention. While some people try to associate them with celebrations that happen around the winter solstice, there isn't really any causal link between pagan practices and what we understand as a Christmas tree. Some try to link it to Egyptian mythology, but that doesn't really work since Christians didn't start actually using Christmas trees until like the 16th century in Germany. The same issue goes with trying to make links with Norse mythology. But the Romans did use fir trees for decorations in celebrations around December, and Christianity started within the Roman Empire, so that could be a reasonable point of origin. The idea is that since Rome had this celebration called Saturnalius, which would line up into December, they also had one called Sola Victa, which would sometimes fall into December, that Christians pretty much just latched onto this holiday and shooed in Jesus' birth as some sort of political ploy to make everyone Christian in the empire. But there's a few issues with that theory. The first one is that Jesus' birth, lying on December 25th, was determined completely separately from Roman celebrations of Saturnalius or Sola Victa. It's a little weird for us to understand, but among early Christians, there was this concept that really holy people would die on the day that they were conceived. This came about by looking at like the Old Testament and seeing people like Noah and Abraham dying on whole number of years. And so they figured that Jesus, being God incarnate, would have to have died on the day that he was conceived. Some going as far as say it was like the exact hour. So if Jesus died around Passover, that could be sometime in like late March. And so when you count 9 months after that, you get to late December. And so the date that they determined for Jesus' birth was December 25th. Some argue that it would have to be in spring based on shepherds being present, but early Christians said that could still be a thing in December, and ultimately it's not important for our discussion. What matters is that the date of December 25th as Jesus' birth is not connected to Saturnalius or Sola Victa at all. The fact that they line up with each other is purely coincidental. But that doesn't mean certain pagan Roman practices wouldn't be absorbed by Christians, especially if they're celebrating two holidays around the same time. In fact, we would probably expect that to happen. It's not like every Christian practice is wholly original. Some of them did, in fact, draw on pagan practices. So why is the Christmas tree not? Especially since Romans would use firs as decorations around Saturnalius. So it seems like a pretty reasonable connection. They used firs around December. Christmas trees are fir trees. We put them up in December. Seems like a pretty reasonable connection. But there's kind of a few issues with this. While they can correlate, that obviously doesn't mean there's a causal link between them, especially since we can just rationalize it. Fir trees are around in December. They survive. They're green, they're pretty, of course they're going to use them. And if you pay attention to a lot of these articles that try to argue that Christmas trees are pagan, they use pretty particular language. They'll talk about them using firs as decorations, but they don't talk about them putting up fir trees, and that's for good reason. It didn't really do it. Most of the ways that Romans would be using firs as decorations around Saturnalius would be as garland or wreaths, neither of which are really that original. Of course, Christians also use those as decorations, but those are pretty reasonable ways of arranging flora that transcend cultural boundaries, just kind of like putting it there, putting it in a circle. Every culture has some sort of version of that. So to say that one caused the other is not very strong, especially for full-blown trees as opposed to just wreaths or garland. Probably the biggest evidence for Christmas trees not being pagan is just the fact that Christians didn't really put up fir trees around Christmas until like the 16th century in Germany. So a very Christian area quite a bit after pagan Rome. So that makes those sorts of influences less likely than these articles tend to make it out to be. So what is the actual story of the Christmas tree? Why do Christians put these up in their houses at Christmas time? There is one story, though I wouldn't put that much faith into it, that it was the German Protestant reformer Martin Luther who started the practice of bringing in fir trees and decorating it around wintertime. The story goes something like this. Martin Luther was walking in the woods in winter and saw the majesty of the stars through evergreen trees. He found it so beautiful that he decided to recreate it in his own home by cutting down a fir tree, bringing it inside, and putting candles on it. There's also an account of a fir tree being adorned with candles in 1539 in the Cathedral of Strasbourg. There is also a depiction of one on a private home in modern-day France. I think it was the Holy Roman Empire at the time, in 1576. While I wouldn't say that Luther was definitely the one who started the practice, I do think it's safe to say that it was German Protestants around the 15th and 16th century that started the practice of bringing in the Old Tannenbaum around Christmas time. Oh, and that song, Old Tannenbaum, or Christmas Tree, as it's generally translated for us, that has nothing to do with Christmas. It was written by a German composer in the 1820s, just about evergreen trees. I should also note that in the 16th century, among some Western Christians, there was a practice known as the Paradise Tree. This was something that was done in places like Germany, where you would put up a fir tree in your house on December 24th, and you would adorn it with like fruits. And this would represent the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. You would do this along with like some sort of play or just reading Genesis to kind of remember the fall of man. And then on December 25th, you would take all the decorations off the tree and put new ones on to kind of represent the redemption of man through the birth of Jesus Christ. If you're curious as to why us Americans have the Christmas tree, a lot of it comes down to two big reasons. The first one is German immigrants. There was a lot of those for a very long time. And the other reason would connect with England in the 1800s when Queen Victoria married that German guy. So the Christmas tree found its way into the royal family. And if you know anything about Queen Victoria, pretty much every middle-class household in England picked this up, and that it would also, of course, find its way across the pond as well. So both just German immigrants and the Victorian period, we were going to end up with the Christmas tree over here. So yeah, Christmas trees, they didn't come from 3,000-year-old Egyptian celebrations, or Vikings, or even the Romans. It was the result of a bunch of Protestants in Germany in the 16th century. So be sure to correct your edgy cousin and your fundamentalist aunt this Christmas. And I'd say that's the main reason why I even wanted to make this video. It's just really interesting to me how there's such a misunderstanding about certain Christmas practices, and really just Christian practices in general, and a lot of religious practices that come from those outside of the religion and also within it. Because there are Christians who straight up think these things are like idols or the result of pagan traditions, and so don't want to use them themselves. And like, I don't really care. If you don't like Christmas trees, don't use them. But just the fact that they just don't know that these things are originally Christian. And the same thing goes with non-Christians who think the same thing. It's just interesting how they overlap in that way. But I also think it's important just to clarify that while there isn't any evidence that Christmas trees are pagan, I also don't really know why that matters at all. For one, cultures appropriate cultures all the time. Some say that's what cultures are. Religions are just a group of people, so culture. So it's not really surprising that they would do things like appropriate other traditions. Now, there are ways where appropriating traditions could be bad. But for the Christmas tree? If that was a pagan practice, does it discount Christianity? I don't think the argument works. There's probably better ways you could go about that. Why are you harping on a decoration? I think what matters the most for practices like this is just, what does it mean to the people doing it? Does it harm other people? No. Does it mean something to them? Probably. Is it fun? Yeah. The origin of it generally doesn't matter. For certain things, maybe, but for Christmas trees, there's just no evidence that Christians stole it. Maybe for other things, not this guy. Now, I'm planning on making a whole lot more videos in the future, so if you like this, please let me know, because I'm still trying to figure out what sorts of videos I want to make. This one has been fun to research, and I have a few more that I have already planned, so I'm just kind of figuring out what I want to do. So if you liked it, please let me know, and then also consider liking the video. It helps a lot. And if you're curious about what I'm going to be doing, I would, of course, be very happy if you subscribed, but also, there's not that many videos on this channel. I'd understand if you didn't want to. But regardless, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas.